such a good month of reading. It was great. This is my favorite book. I'm obsessed. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Too Cool for Middle School. I have been so excited to make this video. Today we're going to be talking about books 61 through 70 that I've read in 2020, and I think this might be my favorite batch of 10 of the year so far. It does include my very favorite book that I have read in 2020, so I'm really excited to talk about that book with you. We have a good mix this time. I think my last video was like almost all biographies. This time we've got some historical fiction, we've got some thriller, some magical realism, some fantasy, some nonfiction, a memoir, one biography, a teaching book, an elementary aged book. So yeah, we kind of have a little bit of everything. So I'm really excited. Let's just go ahead and get started. Coffee is getting cold. Okay, we're gonna start with this one. This is Tecumseh and Brock, The War of 1812 by James Laxer. I actually read this probably during the last set of 10 books, but I had forgotten to write it down, and then I was looking at it and I was like, oh, did I never talk about this one? Sometimes I just forget to write the books down that I read. It's not a perfect system, but pretty close. So I found this one to be really interesting. I feel like most people don't know a whole lot about the War of 1812. Even US history teachers, you know, maybe they spend like 1 or 2 days on it. It sounds incredibly boring, but as usual, if history is boring, that usually means we're doing it wrong. So looking at the War of 1812 through the lens of Tecumseh, who is absolutely fascinating, and then a Canadian general basically, makes it much more interesting. And I say this all the time, but if we're teaching like early US history and at least 50% of it is not from the perspective of or interactions with Native American tribes, we're leaving out everything, and that's why it's so hard to understand. So if you want to understand the War of 1812 a lot better, read this book. I found the sections on Tecumseh a lot more interesting than the sections on Brock. And like we were talking about in the last video, about all the biographies, the author of this book is a professor of political science at the Department of Equity Studies at York University. He lives in Toronto. There must be a York University in Toronto and not the one in York, England that I'm thinking of. But anyway, very well researched. I definitely recommend this, especially for like US history teachers. The next book is another really good one. This one's called Daniel Inouye. It's by Louise Chipley Slavicek. Okay, I have to admit, typically when a book looks like this, you know, it's got a little bit of like a retro vibe, I assume it's not going to be very good. I assume it's going to be kind of boring. This is, you know, like something that I would picture in my school library when I was in middle school, so I didn't have very high hopes for this. It's fantastic. It's so well written, it's so well researched, and this author, let's see, she has a master's in history, okay, cool, and she writes books for young adults, Women of the Revolution, Israel, the Great Wall of China, okay, so she clearly like specializes in history. She brings in so many different threads and covers so many different perspectives in this book. I thought she just did an excellent job. And Daniel Inouye was from Hawaii. He's Japanese American. He fought in World War II. He lost his arm. He came back to Hawaii and ended up becoming a member of the House of Representatives and then of the Senate. So it gets into like Hawaiian statehood and just representation and Asian Americans in the political scene, and it's just so good. It's short, you know, it didn't take a whole lot of time to read, but I learned a ton. I loved it. I thought it was amazing. So yeah, I shouldn't judge books by their cover. The next book that I read, I started quite a while ago, and then I think I just like set it on my bedside table and got away from it for a little while, but I came back to it and it's really good. I think I've read all of Stacey Lee's novels at this point. She is a historical fiction writer, and so in her stories, she always weaves in a character who is Chinese or Chinese American, and it's so interesting to read her books because there were Chinese Americans in all of these stories. She has one that's more about like westward expansion, one that is set in Atlanta, and then this one is set in San Francisco during the time of like the San Francisco earthquake. So it's, you know, like turn of the 20th century. Oh, on the back here you can see these are two of her other books, The Downstairs Girl and Under a Painted Sky. So they're all really good. They're like firmly YA historical fiction novels, so your students will enjoy them, but even an adult reading them will learn a lot about the time period and the situation that she's writing about. So she does a lot of research, and then the characters that she weaves in are realistic, just less commonly seen in history or historical fiction. I'm thinking of using this one as like a whole class novel, or maybe in literature circles in some way. There's another book that I read earlier this year called Dragon Wings by Lawrence Yep, and it's a really, really similar book. Like they're set during the exact same time, but it's about a Chinese boy. So I feel like these two would partner together really well. So yeah, we'll see what I can end up doing with this one, but I liked it a lot. The next book that I read was for Amory's Book Club. These books always end up being some of my favorites, and this one was no exception. This is Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Gyasi. And then at the end of the month, Amory will do an Instagram live with the author. So that was really cool to hear from the author about the writing of this book. There's so much to this book, and I feel like each person reading it is going to come away with some different like understandings and themes and stuff. So that's why it was really nice to do like the Instagram live and see everybody else's comments and questions and stuff like that. It's about a girl whose parents are from Ghana, and they move to this like tiny town in Alabama, and it's a mostly white town. And the girl ends up growing up and studying like the brain and addiction. Religion and faith is a huge theme in this book. And we were talking in the Instagram live, like it makes you kind of sad that they went to this like white church where there was just a lot of damage done to them, or at least to Gifty, that's the main character, and her brother. It's interesting because like Gifty and her brother experience racism in a different way than the mom and dad, because, you know, they grew up their whole life in Ghana where Black people are the majority, and then when they moved to the United States, they just don't, you know, feel the racism in the same way as their kids who are American. So anyway, we did discuss this like, you know, alternate plot. Like what if they had gone to a Black church? What if their identities had been affirmed by like more Black people around them? Like how different would their life have been? I'm still not over Nana. She has a brother who becomes addicted to painkillers, and, you know, just the dysfunction within the family and the impact of religion and race and all of that. So it's just, it's really interesting. I highly recommend it. Jensen is here.
I think I'm a button pusher.
You think you're a button pusher?
Yeah.
Oh. Oh, because he took my pictures. He pushed the button. But right now it's okay. We don't have to push the button. Okay, halfway here. The next book that I read is called The Unicorn Rescue Society, The Basque Dragon. This is for younger students, like elementary age readers, and I definitely grabbed it because it said the Basque Dragon on it. When I was in high school, we had foreign exchange students from the Basque country, which is basically like the Pyrenees Mountains, you know, part of France and Spain, but they do not consider themselves to be French or Spanish. They have their own language, Euskara, although they also speak, you know, either Spanish or French, and a lot of times English as well. They have their own culture and history, and they're their own ethnic group, and, you know, their language is a language isolate. It's not connected to any other languages around the world. They're just so fascinating, and I got to go there and visit when I was like 18 or 19, and it's gorgeous, it's beautiful. I'm so fascinated by the culture, and I had never seen it really depicted in a book for kids. So I was really excited about this one. I'm definitely gonna save it for Jensen when he gets a little bit older to read and learn more about the Basque country. So eskerrik for writing this book, Adam Gidwitz. The next one is one of my highest recommendations for teachers, just ever, and in general. I usually don't enjoy teaching books all that much, but this one I thought was great. This is Cultivating Genius by Goldie Muhammad, and I just love everything about this. And it's, you know, it's not very long. You can definitely get through this pretty quickly and just learn about her framework for culturally and historically responsive literacy. So what's really interesting about this book is that she bases a lot of her ideas about education upon these Black literary societies from like the 19th century. So as Black people became free after the Civil War and were able to educate themselves, they dedicated themselves to that education and to writing and to reading and to publishing their own newspapers. And the process of becoming literate and becoming good writers and good readers and good speakers was, you know, much bigger than just like for a grade. It was to make change and share ideas and to regain power. And so that's the like energy that flows through this whole book. So just to give you a quick summary of it, well, I love the idea of historically responsive literacy and taking into account our students' histories, our schools' histories, our own histories, and, you know, how all of that merges, and trying to figure out like what is immediately important for all of us. What are we working towards? Why do we need to be able to communicate? What kind of ideas are we going to communicate? What kind of stories are we going to learn? What kind of stories are imperative for us to learn? And she has like 4 layers to this framework. So towards the pursuit of identity, and that includes for us as the teachers as well as for our students. And this definitely does not mean like glossing over all of our students and, you know, treating them all as if they have all the same background and all the same culture and all the same race, because they don't. And their individual identities matter. And I have found this type of reading and writing about identity to be so engaging for my students and so important and really like healing, and a way to really like grow as a person and to have some like urgency in their writing. So toward the pursuit of identity, toward the pursuit of skills, like we need to be able to do this in a skillful way, right? We want to be able to read with comprehension so that we can take in these stories that are so interesting to us. And we need to be able to write with clarity and with passion because we so badly want for other people to understand our ideas and our point of view. And toward the pursuit of intellect and also criticality. I'm going to kind of put these two together. So it's very intellectually stimulating to hold more than one idea in your mind at the same time. And then we have, you know, discussions about those things, and we draw connections to a different text that we read. And so just everything that she writes about is everything that I love about teaching. And I really think that every teacher should read this book, and I think it's amazing, especially if you're a new teacher. I think this one is just great. The next book that I read, I saw all these different people posting about on Instagram, so I thought I would grab it. It's a thriller called When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. And I love the quote at the very beginning of this book from W.E.B. Du Bois in 1935. He said, "One is astonished in the study of history at the recurrence of the idea that evil must be forgotten, distorted, skimmed over. The difficulty, of course, with this philosophy is that history loses its value as an incentive and example. It paints perfect men and noble nations, but it does not tell the truth." And then the very first line of the book is, "History is effing wild." So there is so much history infused within this book. It takes place in a neighborhood in New York, like, you know, a borough that is becoming gentrified. It's all these beautiful brownstones. And when the main character was growing up there, you know, all of her neighbors were Black. It was this Black neighborhood. But recently people have been moving out, and a lot of white people have been moving in and then like renovating the brownstone either to live in it or flip it. You know, it's definitely a commentary on like the gentrification of a lot of neighborhoods of color right now. And so it'll really, really get you thinking about like where you live and the actual building that you live in, and who built this and who used to live in it and who had to leave in order to make space for you, and what kind of an impact does your presence in this neighborhood make. And so there's definitely that just like practical layer, plus you learn a lot more about the history of these neighborhoods. And then also this is a thriller, and so there's like a more sinister undercurrent to the book that, you know, is maybe far-fetched or maybe not. So I definitely recommend it if you're looking for like a little bit more of a spooky book to read during the month of October, but nothing like too gory or anything like that. This is a good recommendation for that. The next one definitely won me over because of the cover. I just thought this one was so beautiful. This is We Set the Dark on Fire by Taylor K. Mejia. And this is more of like dystopian YA fiction. If your students like The Hunger Games, Divergent, stuff like that, they would like this one. I would say the concept isn't anything like groundbreaking, but it's really interesting because it's set on this like fictional island, but just the backdrop of everything is Latinx culture. It's written in English, but there's a lot of Spanish just like mixed in throughout the book. The names of all the characters sound kind of Spanish. They eat these really decadent meals that have like sangria and tortillas and salsa and just all this delicious food. And all of the characters have brown skin, black hair, you know, but that isn't a plot point in any way. That's just, you know, the backdrop upon which she's writing this book. So it's really refreshing to see that. I don't want to give too much away, but there's like a forbidden love in this book. One of the like main premises of the book is that every man marries two women. So one wife is like his friend, I guess, and more of like his intellectual partner, kind of his intellectual equal. And he discusses business with her and like makes plans with her. And then he has another wife that is just beautiful and sexy, and that's who he has children with. And the girls have to go to this special school to like learn the skills that they'll need to be a wife. High school, you know, maybe 8th grade students will really like this one. Okay, this book is one of the most like personally emotional books that I have read in a long time. This is the YA version of When They Call You a Terrorist by Patrice Kahn-Coolers. She's one of the 3 women who founded the Black Lives Matter movement. And I really just wanted to learn more about these women who have, you know, for the most part, like stayed on the sidelines, not in the sense that they're not working super hard, but just in the sense that they're not like, you know, constantly on TV, constantly giving interviews, constantly giving speeches, and like visibly leading marches and stuff. And, you know, as you read the book, you'll learn that they, you know, set up the movement in this way on purpose so that more people are involved and more people take responsibility for their own activism. And gosh, you have to like at least consider, she doesn't mention this ever, but most of the leaders of the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s were assassinated. Like I would assume that has to factor into their thinking. Maybe they, you know, are going about it a different way. Because I don't think most people would like recognize their faces if they just saw them on the street. And maybe that's for safety reasons. That's just kind of my interpretation. I'm not sure if that's necessarily their motivation, but maybe. This book is a memoir. It's about Patrice's experience growing up in LA. And I really feel, I've heard this several times recently, like people talking about like, oh, well, growing up in LA in the 90s and my parents got us out because it was so crime ridden and so dangerous. I think that might be a lot of our understanding of LA in the 90s and like gang-ridden streets and stuff like that. But read this book just to understand what it was like from the perspective of somebody who lived there and grew up there and was being policed there. This is mostly about her and her family's interactions with law enforcement from a really young age. And one of her brothers was bipolar, I believe. He has a mental illness, which just is basically, you know, a prison sentence, maybe a lifelong prison sentence, because nobody gives him the benefit of the doubt in any way. And it just kind of makes you just think twice about what prisons are and how they function and who they are benefiting. And so one of the things that hit me so hard in this book is that she wrote the first #BLM post in my hometown. The reason she was in my hometown is because there's actually 3 huge prisons, and she was there visiting like a mentee of hers who was 18, and committed a robbery, a nonviolent crime, and he was getting 10 years in prison for it, at the same time that George Zimmerman was walking free for killing a black child. So the context for this and like the backdrop and the setting is in a hotel in Susanville, California, where I'm from. And this is how she describes it. Of the just under 20,000 residents, nearly half, 46%, live in one of the town's 2 prisons. If you saw a picture of it, West Virginia would likely come to mind before California would. This is creepy accurate. And it looks like American towns across the rest of the country, small and working class, except here the demographics report an extraordinary diversity, if that is, diversity is distorted like a horror house mirror or a story from the Twilight Zone. In Susanville, there is almost no one who is black and free at the same time, although a cursory reading of sensory reports would have you believing it's a racial kumbaya. Once a place where loggers and miners worked, today's Susanville's singular growth industry is prisons. Roughly half of all the adults who live here work at one of the 2 facilities. Being here, looking at the storefronts, the people, it feels like we are trapped in a black and white photograph from the deep south in the 1950s. The images of hard rural living come stuttering back as if to taunt us that freedom has never arrived and won't. What must it be like to live hoping for and invested in war and crime, because without them, the people of Susanville must believe that the world would collapse. This is so accurate, and I mean, there's so much more that I could go into about this, and I've been talking to other people who also grew up in Susanville about this, and just the fact that our town is mostly white when you walk around, because again, the only free people there are white, and for most of them, their job is to guard black and brown men and women every day. Like your whole job is to, put these people in their place, and you're like the hero for doing that and keeping the rest of the community safe from these terrible people. And you really don't interact with any black or brown people outside of a literal like high security state prison environment. And it's just it absolutely has an effect on people's unconscious biases. And the people who I've seen on like Facebook most loudly and obnoxiously and ignorantly calling BLM a terrorist organization are all from Susanville. So there's just most certainly a connection there. And this is my legacy. This is where I grew up. This is something I have to take responsibility for and reflect on. So yeah, this is something I'm going to be thinking about for a while. Now, to end this video, we have my favorite book of the entire year. This book is called We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. This might be like my favorite book ever. Like if I had to say what my favorite book is right now, this would be it. Here's the flip side of Susanville, to be honest, you guys. For me, growing up there, it was great. And this is the thing about anywhere and anything, right? There are amazing things about it and then often a darker side, and it just kind of depends on who you are. But for me, as a white girl growing up there, it was like idyllic, it was this small town where you knew everybody and where I played on like every single sports team, and I had all these opportunities to just like try things out because they needed players and whatever. So, I mean, for me, it was great. I had an excellent childhood in Susanville, but I do remember as soon as I turned 18 and graduated from high school, just being like, I need to get out of here. I know that this is not enough for me. I know that there's a world beyond this and I need to see it. But in high school, I played field hockey and I absolutely loved it. I don't really know like why we played field hockey in Northern California. We had this league where we'd have to travel like 4 hours to Davis and play teams in Davis and like Chico. There weren't a whole lot of teams. This is more of like an East Coast thing. So this one is set in like a suburb of Boston, but like the training over the summer, the camps, all of that is like exactly the same. And this is set in 1989. So there are a lot of references to like hair, This is the funniest book I've ever read. I was laughing out loud so many times. I don't know if it's just because I can like immediately visualize these field hockey players from 1989 and kind of relate to them, but I feel like anybody would love this one. You know what, like the tone of it reminds me of is Glow. If you've seen Glow on Netflix, which is one of also my favorite shows ever, This is really similar to that. So it's written from the point of view of just the team. So the narrator is just the team, like all 11 people are the narrator. And none of them are the narrator. I don't know, it's really weird, but it works. You get used to it like immediately. And then like each chapter gives you a little bit more insight into each character, just kind of like an episode of Glow. And they've made a deal with the devil, who is Emilio Estevez, in like a trapper keeper binder, and they all sign their names at field hockey camp. This is just like this is how it goes. And they really want to, you know, win a state championship, and so they've got to like do all these things in order to like keep up their winning streak. So this is set, you know, near Boston, so there's like the history of the Salem witch trials and the Crucible and all of that is kind of in the background, and they're always making references to. So if you teach the Crucible, I highly, highly recommend this. Like if any of your students end up, you know, high school students end up like loving the Crucible, they should totally read this. I told my old field hockey coach, I was like, this should be like required reading for your field hockey team next year. And I just love these like unapologetically themselves girls. They're super motivated and driven, just, you know, in whatever they're interested in, whether it's sports or healthy eating or school or getting a boyfriend or whatever. This is just like what they do, and they just like accept each other. It's not syrupy or sappy at all. Oh, and it's not 11 girls, it's 10 girls and then boy Corey. So there's boy Corey and girl Corey, which is just like so my high school. That's for sure how we would have referred to people. Oh, there's like a 4-H barn at the fair scene. Like that is my life. Like I did 4-H and raised my animals, and the fair, you know, is the social event of the year, and you go to like the 4-H barns and like see everybody's animals. Like this was just, it was like reliving my life. If I had made a pact with the devil to win all of our field hockey games, which we clearly didn't do because we didn't win very many, if I remember correctly. But oh my gosh, I can't recommend this highly enough. If you read it, please comment or message me on Instagram or something. Let's please talk about this book. I've told so many people to read it. I'm like, please read this book. I need to talk about it. It's my favorite. Quan Berry is my new favorite author. I can't find her on like Instagram or Twitter or anything. She's, you know, what an author should be, just like this elusive figure that I don't know anything about. Even her picture in here, this is like her when she's a little kid. So I love it. This is my favorite book. I'm obsessed. And this whole stack, all of these, I would highly recommend. Such a good month of reading. It was great. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I will link all the books down below. Let me know if you read any of them. I just want to talk about them. They were all so good. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.